need an agenda.
What? Let me tell you something, Hoss. Working hard don't give any dang one bit in this world. And I'll tell you something, when you walk out the door, you're gonna know. When you walk out the door, they don't care what you done, who you done it for, what they don't.
Thank you.
It don't matter, it don't matter. You can bust your butt, and they don't know when you walk out there.
Mac, you ready?
Be careful.
Karen, you ready? If you would please stand as we say the pledge and have an invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be involved in our local government. We just ask that you guide us and direct us and that your will be done in our decisions tonight. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Amen. We'll go ahead and open the meeting, and before we get too far along, just want to remind everybody, if you haven't done so already, please silence or turn off your cell phones. Also, just a couple of quick other housekeeping things. I don't think we'll have a problem with this, but we will, if the meeting goes to 9 o'clock, we'll have a 9 o'clock time certain cutoff. Anything that we don't finish by then will be moved to the next meeting. Hopefully we won't get anywhere near that, but you never know. Also, if you would like to speak, we want everybody to have the opportunity to speak and to tell us what they want us to hear. I ask that you try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. That way we can get as much done as possible and give everybody the opportunity to have their say. Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 9 items on our agenda tonight. Microphone on here. As I said, we have 9 items on our agenda tonight. We do have 2 items that we wish to continue and a portion of item number 1. How would you like us to proceed on those?
Let's go ahead and take those first.
Okay. If we could come back to number 1 and just
Okay.
cover that one, because that's a 2-part. Item number 2, our comprehensive plan glossary of terms. We request that that be continued to November 8th, 2018, Planning Commission meeting at 4 p.m. in this location.
Do we have a motion?
Motion made.
Second?
Second.
A motion, second, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. And item number 4, the Verizon wireless cell tower at Pretty Pond. We have a request to continue that item to the October 11, 2018 Planning Commission meeting at 4 p.m. in this location.
Okay, is that the applicant requesting that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Commissioners, do we have a motion?
Motion to continue.
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Coming back to item number 1 under legislative items. This is a request to consider an ordinance substantially amending the Walton County Land Development Code, and specifically Chapter 9 definitions. We request that that portion of the amendment be continued to November 8th, 2018, at 4 p.m. in this location.
Okay.
That would be
Explain to me how that's gonna break down in this information we have here. Is that like tab 1?
Well, yes, that's in tab 1, and it's the definitions portion that we're asking to continue.
Okay.
The balance of that tab, we are proposing for deletion in the current code because those are being moved. They're either being eliminated or being moved to other sections.
Okay. Commissioners?
Motion to continue.
Second.
Motion to continue just that,
Just the definitions
Definitions
portion.
Those portions.
okay. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And the second, we wish to amend the land development code by deleting those listed appendices.
This is being moved to where?
C1, C2, and C4 are being deleted completely.
Okay.
Appendix C3, the Transportation Concurrency Management System, is being placed into a technical manual that will be a companion to the Land Development Code. So that portion is not being deleted. It's just being moved to
Right.
a sub-document.
Okay. Any questions, Commissioners, for staff?
Move to accept.
We may have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion second. Is anybody from the public who would like to comment on this or ask questions about it? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This brings us to item number 3, the Inlet Beach Water System Wastewater Treatment Plant Large-Scale Amendment. This is a request to approve by ordinance. It's been reviewed by Bob Baranti. This large-scale amendment application is submitted by Jenkins Engineering on behalf of the Inlet Beach Water System. They're requesting approval to amend the future land use map category from conservation residential 2-to-1 and neighborhood infill to institutional on approximately 20.76 acres. The proposed location is on the north side of Lake Powell, adjacent to East Rattlesnake Trail, and is identified by the parcel numbers in your package. We'd like to request that our staff report be entered into the record.
Accepted. What is the, before you sit down, I hope you're not sitting down yet, right?
Not yet.
Okay. I'd like to make sure that we understand staff's position on this.
Well, our position in our staff report is the planning department recommends denial. The history on this particular application, it was presented to the technical review committee, and that committee has issued a unanimous denial recommendation also. Additionally, we've received quite a bit of public comment on this particular item, and I'd like to enter those into the record.
Accepted.
In this folder are 2 items of support, and in this binder are items of objection. And we've received in writing.
That's all in one binder?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Those are the objection letters.
Okay. Can you tell me, Mac, just what the basis is for the staff's recommendation?
This is the wrong spot to put a wastewater treatment plant. It's on the shore of a coastal dune lake, a portion of which is in our coastal dune lake protection zone, where the commission has specifically denied any future wastewater treatment systems in the form of septic tanks on individual lots. We believe that that particular policy speaks to this policy also, board. In addition to that, it's in the watershed of this coastal dune lake, Lake Powell, that we share with Bay County, and that water body is also considered an outstanding Florida water, which has a higher standard under Florida statutes and Florida Administrative Code. We just think it's a bad idea.
Okay.
And the potential for harming the coastal dune lake and that outstanding Florida water is too great of a risk to place this in this location. Our recommendation is they work it out with regional utilities, the current provider of wastewater treatment for the Inlet Beach water system.
Anybody have any questions of staff?
The applicant is here to present their case.
All right.
Scott Jenkins with Jenkins Engineering, here representing the applicant, Inlet Beach Water System. As Max said, this request is really for about 15.6 acres. They're located here. Just for clarity, if you look at that map, that might be a little outdated. The 5 acres to the northeast are not included in this request. It's really just this portion of the property that you see here. To orient you where this is, Highway 98 is here. This is subdivision down in this area is Inlet Beach. This is the crossings. This is Origins. Morristown Origins right here, so you kind of get a feel for where you are. Lake Powell is directly here in this location. This is the kind of tributary finger that runs to it. And then the county line is actually obviously right down here. So this is the portion of the property that is included. Just to hit a few highlights about this request, and then there's some other people that want to talk. Currently, this is in the Inlet Beach area. Currently, the property is 2 parcels, one here, one larger parcel here. The larger CR 2 to 1 is really primarily a single-family residential land use. Right now, infill, as you know, is a higher density land use, and it does allow some commercial. What they're proposing to change this to is really public facilities, which basically only allows public works type projects here, any other uses in that area, if this request were allowed. We have Glenn Stevens is here with Poly Engineering, and they're actually the firm that's dealing with the potential design of the plan itself. The only thing that I wanted to point out is that on this map, this is kind of the conceptual plan that they're looking at and what they're doing. The plan itself would be located here on the property. These areas are basically rapid infiltration basins, which are just big swells, more or less for recharge. And this area that's hatched out down here, the red area, is the 300-foot setback from the coastal overlay. So I think Inland Beach Water and Sewer understands that they can't do anything within that 300-foot setback as allowed by the code, and nothing will be situated south of that area towards the coastal overlay. As far as the outstanding Florida water standards here, that's exactly right. It is an outstanding Florida water. What that means that if they decide, if they do develop within that area, they would have to provide 1.5 tons of treatment volume for any stormwater discharges in the site, which is pretty typical for anything that's in the coastal Dunlay watershed. That kind of gives you the highlights of what the request is. I know Rod Anderson from Inlet Beach Water Systems here, and he wants to kind of tell you about how they got here, you know, why this location, what they've looked at as other alternatives. Because what I will tell you, obviously not a very popular request, as you can tell from the notebooks up here, but it's kind of an atypical request too, because this isn't a typical condominium or a subdivision or a commercial development where if you guys decide it's not a good idea, it just goes away. This issue is not going to go away for Inlet Beach. It's got to be addressed somehow. So if this is not the way to do it, there's got to be some other alternatives, I think I would point out. But I'll turn it over to Rod unless you guys have some questions about the application itself.
No.
But
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name's Rod Anderson. I am a resident of Inlet Beach. I am also on the board of directors for the Inlet Beach Water System. I'm sure after Scott's presentation and particularly Mr. Carpenter's comments, you've got a lot of questions probably. Why are we here? How did we get here? Why in the world would Inlet Beach Water System think about building their own wastewater treatment plant? I'd like to try to answer a few of those questions real briefly. We are basically here today because Regional Utilities does not want to work with Inlet Beach Water System any longer to provide sewage treatment service to the residents of Inlet Beach. How did we get here? Well, back in 2004, the county tasked Inlet Beach Water System with providing sewage collection system for Inlet Beach so that the residents of Inlet Beach would have access to sewer. Inlet Beach built the required collection system. At the same time, the county tasked Regional Utilities with treating the sewage collected by Inlet Beach Water System. Regional Utilities has chosen to no longer honor that agreement. In addition to that, Regional Utility offered to reimburse Inlet Beach Water System $2.5 million from fees collected from us to help Inlet Beach Water System build our own wastewater treatment plant. I want to emphasize that building the wastewater treatment plant was Regional Utilities' idea first. Inlet Beach Water System was never thinking about building our own wastewater treatment plant until these two developments occurred about 18 months ago. Now, Inlet Beach Water System, we're only trying to do our job. Our job is to provide long-term sewage treatment for the current and future residents of Inlet Beach. In 2014, Walton County confirmed our job, we believe, by granting Inlet Beach a 60-year franchise agreement to provide water and sewage services to the residents of Inlet Beach. since Regional Utilities has chosen to no longer treat the sewage from Inlet Beach, we have no other option but to build our own wastewater treatment plant in order to fulfill our responsibilities to the residents of Inlet Beach. Now, many people understand this, but they still ask, why this location? They don't object to a plant, but they say, why so close to Lake Powell and why so close to a neighboring residential neighborhood? The simple answer is that this is the only suitable land we could find that people were willing to sell to us. Years ago, when land was more available and prices were more reasonable, we were not looking at land to buy because we had no thoughts of ever building our own wastewater treatment plant. At that time, we had a 20-year agreement with Regional Utilities that was renewable. Today, the situation has changed. We spent over 6 months trying to buy land with less potential environmental and residential impact. We made 2 offers to one of the largest landowners in this area, but they would not sell. This left us with this property as our only option. Now, at the last TRC, the Commission recommended denial of our land use change because of concerns over the impact of Lake Powell and compatibility with surrounding neighborhoods. We understand those concerns. I myself live on Lake Powell. I live on the water, as does another one of our board members. I kayak and fish on Lake Powell. We would never support anything that we thought would damage Lake Powell. We do not believe this project will have any negative impact to Lake Powell. There were no impacts shown on the conceptual site plan within 300 feet of Lake Powell, which is the required buffer zone for a coastal dune lake. I also understand people in surrounding neighborhoods being concerned about smell. Inlet Beach Water System took interested Inlet Beach residents to visit the county's plant at Mossy Head. This plant is owned and operated by the county, and it's the same plant that we proposed building. There was overwhelming consensus among the people who visited that plant that there was no smell from the plant. In conclusion, we appreciate your time this afternoon. We realize that this is a very unpopular project to some people. We really don't want to build a wastewater treatment plant. However, we are here today because Regional Utilities has chosen to no longer work with Inlet Beach to provide long-term sewage treatment to the residents of Inlet Beach. For that reason, we see no other option. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Well, Commissioners, anybody else have a question?
I've got a question.
Sure.
You said that was a 20-year contract y'all had. When was that, when did that go in force?
It went in force in 2000, in 2003. It expires in 2023. The original contract. Regional Utilities has canceled the contract.
Yeah, it's still in effect now, right?
No, we no longer have a contract.
So they're still processing sewage for you.
They are.
And why do they do not want to renew it? Is there anybody from Regional here that can answer that?
I really can't answer that question because we have requested a meeting with them. We've requested a meeting with our engineers and the management of our Inlet Beach water system to try to understand their issues and try to work out a solution, and through their attorney, they refuse to meet.
Is it a money problem?
Pardon me?
Is it a money problem?
They have never expressed a money problem.
So the contract is gone. Y'all saw that coming years ago, right?
No, we didn't. We didn't see this coming. When this was litigated years ago, we thought it was all settled.
I mean, I just, for my clarification, you said it was a 20-year contract.
Yes, sir.
So,
It expires in 2023.
okay. So how can they cancel it now?
They have the option to cancel with 1 year notice. February of 2017, they gave us 1 year notice that they were canceling the contract.
So it's still in effect for now.
Well, you couldn't have this up and running by then anyway, so what would you do? Even if this got approved, you couldn't have this plant up and running by a year from now.
Well, it's that's why we started the process, acquiring land, getting the design for the plant, was to try to originally have it up and running before the contract expired, or hopefully work something out with them. But right now, we have no contract. Now, they have, by law, I believe, they have to continue to service existing sewage customers, but future sewage customers is a different matter.
So they can't put a plug in it, so to say, and stop servicing anybody.
That is my understanding.
It would
Current
make sense. I don't know what would happen if they did.
customers is my understanding.
They'd have a nasty mess on their hands.
My understanding, current customers cannot be stopped, but there would be no future
Right.
customers.
Right.
Well, maybe this question should go to Mike, but what does the franchise say for regional utilities? Do they have to cover Inlet Beach?
I'm not sure I can speak directly on that particular franchise agreement. Our attorney might,
Inlet
Be able
Beach
to-
isn't required to provide service in Inlet Beach. Regional Utilities and Inlet Beach Water System had a separate contract. The county was actually a party to that contract as well, but Regional Utilities isn't obligated under their franchise agreement with the county to
Okay.
provide that service. Hope that answers the question.
Sydney, what happens if Inlet Beach can't build a plant because they can't find land suitable, and Regional Utilities says, we're done? What happens?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm afraid that's a question that might be resolved by a judge eventually, but, you know, that's not something I can give you a definitive answer on.
Okay. I understand. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no definitive answer to be given.
Right. I'm afraid not.
Until the judge says Regional Utilities, you're gonna continue to process sewage.
Yeah, so right now, and I mean, I don't think you should really factor this into your decision, but just so you have the information, right now, Regional Utilities and Inlet Beach Water System are involved in litigation over the contracts that was mentioned during the presentation. You know, so that is pending right now.
Okay. Do y'all have anything else to present?
Good afternoon, I'm Glenn Stevens, I'm the design engineer for the project. We've done preliminary engineering and preliminary design, that's as far as we've gone because of the issue that we're discussing. Some of the technicalities, all of the wastewater from Inlet Beach now goes to a single pump station, and what they would do is they would divert that pump station from, if this were to come about, they would divert that wastewater flow from going to regional utilities up North Wall Street to the property that they're considering, and pump everything up to this facility, and the crossing there of the tributary would be by a directional bore under it, so there would be no impact to it. And once the wastewater is pumped to the treatment facility, everything will flow by gravity through the treatment facility. All the components will be sized for peak wet weather hydraulic flow, so there will be no possibility of overflow that's required by DEP. There will be an emergency generator at the site to back everything up, so treatment would be carried on in case of a loss of power. And the treated water would go into what's called rapid infiltration basins, which is strictly just a level sandy swell, if you will, that the water would flow into, and it would percolate into the groundwater. And it would be applied at a slow rate. I say all this basically to say that there is no chance and DEP would require that in their permitting process, that there will be any sort of discharge directly to a surface water.
That would be intentional discharge, right?
It will be intentional, and DEP will, their requirements will have, there'll be backup for everything, backup for any pump, everything is sized, will have to be sized to handle, like I said, peak, wet weather flow, with generator backup on all the treatment, so it would be very, very, very unlikely there would ever be an overflow.
My problem is it's very unlikely. I mean, that's not, I don't think you can say definitively there can't be a mistake or can't be a leak. I don't know how you can possibly say
I did not say that.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
But I can assure you that there will be consequences if that
Well, I'm sure
happens.
there'll be consequences that you don't want to have to face if there's a leak, I can assure you.
Well, let me ask you, what about if a major hurricane came in with a lot of rain, a lot of flooding, would that affect your plant?
It would affect the flow somewhat, but most of the sewers in Inlet Beach are new sewers, PVC sewers. They have very little infiltration. Their flow rates don't change a lot when the rains come in. Of course,
So you're not having stormwater come into it?
No, there's no stormwater that comes.
Okay.
It'll be strictly wastewater. No stormwater. What little tiny bit of stormwater that actually leaks into the sewer system, which is minimal, would come in, but it's a very, very small amount. Their flows do not change significantly during rainfall events. It is not a combined sanitary and stormwater system.
I have a question about the property itself. The property, it has already been purchased. Has it been purchased, or is it just?
Option.
We have contracts for, we have option to purchase.
Option to purchase it, but it has not already been
It
purchased.
has not been purchased. We have options pending,
Due diligence.
of the project.
What about the surrounding property? I would imagine this would affect the values of their properties pretty significantly.
Significantly. It'd kill it.
The plant is gonna be designed such that, you won't even know it's there. It will be covered with vegetation. It's on 15 acres. It will sit in the middle of 15 acres. You really won't even be able to see it. It's a area with a lot of vegetation as it is now.
Let me ask you this, though, if I've got my house for sale a half mile down the road and I gotta drive by that to get to my house, and a buyer's coming to look at my house and he says, what's that? And you tell him it's a sewage treatment plant, what effect does that have on the value of my house?
Well, this area, this is off Rattlesnake Road, which is
I understand that.
dirt road.
Uh-huh.
Under the power lines back there, there are very few houses. There were only 38 letters sent out to people within the required 300-foot area.
Mhm.
So I don't know,
Well, somebody told somebody else,
Yeah.
because a lot of those letters are coming from,
yeah,
Well-
I'm sure, there's a lot
Yeah,
of other correspondence going on, but it's not a densely populated.
I understand that.
I can't answer what.
I know, it's just, that was my point, it can't be answered.
I've asked realtors in the Destin area,
Mhm.
if the, plan in said Destin had any impact on property values, and they said, no, there are houses, right close. That's what I've been told, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I've got along the same lines, I got a question, it's probably to Sydney. Now, this is probably not a great option, but can they eminent domain if they,
It's my understanding, and it's been a while since I've looked at the franchise. Inlet Beach also has a franchise agreement with Walton County, and it's my understanding that as part of the franchise agreement, they do have the ability to, acquire property through eminent domain proceedings, but I would have to check the.
right, because
Franchise
obviously
agreements
this
to
is
be
not
sure.
a very popular spot to put a sewer treatment plant.
Okay. Anyway, let's let them finish up real
I
quick.
I have a couple other things to say
Okay,
about the
go ahead.
design, et cetera. It'll have to go through the DEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection permitting process. I have discussed this with Bill Evans, who is the environmental permitting section at DEP. We know that Lake Powell is classified an outstanding Florida water, that DEP has done that. We know that the DEP rules apply. I can quote specific rules if you're interested, but the rules basically say that the project must not adversely affect fish and wildlife in Lake Powell. It must not adversely affect the recreational value. And it must not significantly degrade water quality in Lake Powell. We understand all that. Mr. Evans has said that the DEP most likely will require advanced treatment at this facility, and they would set permit limits for discharge of the treated water to the rapid infiltration basins, which would be very, very strict, very low nitrogen concentrations. And then, of course, the rapid infiltration basins provide some additional treatment. And DEP, Mr. Evans has said the DEP will require high-level disinfection as part of the design of this facility. And then, of course, we've talked about it, so I'll just briefly talk about the Land Development Code and the 300-foot buffer zone that y'all are familiar with. Scott did point it out. That's what the red lines on this map are, and there's nothing that we have planned that is inside that 300-foot buffer zone. Although in my reading of the Land Development Code, some development actually is allowed in there, but we're not doing any. And an environmental assessment has been done on this site already by Wetland Sciences. They looked at the soil types. They say the soil is suitable. They've looked at the vegetation. They've identified a particular vegetative community that they say has to be protected. All of that has been taken into consideration in the design. They've looked at threatened and endangered species of plants and animals, none were found. They've looked at archaeological sites, none found. There are buffer zones all around every part of the facility that's being allowed for. And as Rod said, the actual treatment plant itself, which is really the only thing that's going to look different, the ribs are going to be just sandy holding areas. But the treatment plant itself is being set back into the middle of the site as far as we can get it, and there'll be buffer zones all around it. We try to minimize the impact in there as much as we can. So, Inlet Beach thinks that they have adequately addressed reasonable concerns about protecting the environment, specifically Lake Powell. We know this project still has to go through the DEP permitting process, and you can rest assured that DEP will do everything they can to protect Lake Powell. And if for some reason DEP doesn't permit the process, it obviously can't be built, so.
Thank you. Y'all have any, okay, we got one more.
Good evening, I'm Nick Beninati. I just wanted to comment on a couple of the comprehensive plan issues. I'm an attorney, I handle land use issues. But first, maybe it'd be helpful to add some context. There are some questions about what happens if we can't convince regional utilities to continue to provide treatment, or what about the property values, what happens? Well, there's a couple possibilities. There'll either be no new development in the area because you have various rules that are highly discouraging development if there's no sewage available, or the county's going to be put in a situation where it's going to be massaging its rules to allow some more septic tanks in the area, which is also a negative situation. So as far as values to the properties nearby, I mean, the properties immediately nearby, they're vacant. So if this project didn't go forward, or if something didn't get worked out with regional utilities, they have a big problem on their hands with value because their properties are going to be unbuildable. As for the homes that are a quarter mile away, I don't know. It will depend on what exactly this facility ends up being like, but it's a low to the ground, low impact, low visibility kind of site. It was very, very unlikely to be something that people would even notice. But back to the comprehensive plan issues. In your reports you've received, you've already seen written statements that this project would be inconsistent with the goals and policies in your comp plan. You've already heard from MAC that staff is against the project. So, I mean, that comes from a logical standpoint, and we all know that Walton County likes the environment. It values these lakes, especially Lake Powell, and there's kind of a gut reaction about, well, you wouldn't build much besides just a few homes around Lake Powell, right? Well, that's logical, but it's not necessarily what the rules really are. And it helps to think just in general, big picture, what's the purpose of sewage treatment? Because sewage treatment has a bad stigma to it. People think of negative things, but sewage treatment is to help the environment. It's to ensure that water gets treated before it ends up anywhere else in the environment. And it's to ensure that you end up with less of the negative alternatives, which primarily in our world means septic tanks, because we don't live in a state and a country where people just pump out raw sewage into areas, but we certainly live somewhere where people will pursue septic tanks all around Lake Powell if they had to. So with that in mind, you really have two options to try to work through these issues of, well, what would be compatible, what would be environmentally sound in this area. You could either have a bunch of scientists come in here, ecologists, geologists, hydrologists, and they'd all be paid and provide their competing opinions about, well, what is really a good idea here. And it'd be pretty useless. I mean, they'd all say totally opposite things because they're being paid for their opinions. The better solution, where we are tonight, is your comprehensive plan already deals with a lot of this. It emphasizes issues about septic and sewer and coastal dune lakes all throughout it. So all I really have left to do, I want to just point out a few of those statements. It provides the counterbalancing view of, well, this is just inconsistent. Because there are several policies that this is not just consistent with, but those policies really encourage this kind of thing. So first of all, you've got in your coastal management element, that's one of the parts that people don't read every day. You usually focus on your future land use element, but I'm going to be reading from some other elements that you don't look at as often. You got to knock the dust off them. There are a few things in here that describes how you're going to protect your coastal dune lakes. So the first thing is you've established a coastal dune lake protection zone. It's 300 feet within the lake. We're staying out of that 300-foot area. So you've got that zone, which, yes, part of the property is in, but I mean, I think if it were up to us, we wouldn't necessarily even be buying that. It's just part of the property. You've got then in a little further into the element under CM 1.11F, talks about prohibiting new point sources and non-point sources. You heard from Glenn already, our engineer. That's not what we're doing. There's no pipe to the lake. There's no flow straight out to the lake. This is all back a whole football field away. It's percolation in the ground. Then you also have setbacks, which really it's a duplication of this coastal protection zone. So we're outside of that 300-foot area. All right, so next you've got just instance after instance in your comprehensive plan that basically say no septic tanks around Lake Powell or other lakes like this. You must hook on to central sewer. And really that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people that opportunity. We're trying to avoid the need for septic tanks. So just a few of those. I won't read them all and bore you, but in that same coastal management element, policy CM 1.16, policy CM 1.25, then turning to your sanitary sewer sub-element, you actually have a section in your comprehensive plan all about sewage. You've got more similar statements like that. I'll read one. It's policy I-2.29. Says Walton County shall require connection to central sewer service along Choctawhatchee River and Bay, outstanding Florida waters. This is an outstanding Florida water, including all coastal dune lakes. It's a coastal dune lake. So require whenever service becomes available, consistent with Florida statute reference. This is one of probably a half dozen or more statements like this. And then one more that I'd like to read verbatim, which is very interesting. It goes even further. is from your sanitary sewer sub-element, policy 1-2.210. Walton County shall support funding upgrades and expansion requests for central sewer service to areas around Choctawhatchee River and Bay, outstanding Florida waters, including coastal dune lakes, karst springs, and within floodplains through a variety of measures, including state and federal grants and special appropriations. We're not asking for money, but the point is it's important to have sewage available and ready in these high sensitivity areas, and that's really what Inlet Beach is trying to do. Thank you. Do you have any questions for anybody?
I have a question. What's the status of the litigation between the two utilities?
It's early, and really where it is right now is Regional filed the suit to get out of the contract, to declare the contract done.
Did Inlet file a counterclaim?
I'm actually not working on the litigation, but I don't believe we have.
What is the capacity of this plant?
The existing or the?
The initial capacity that they're wanting to build will be 150,000 gallons per day.
Yeah, that's the point we didn't really make earlier. I mean, some people think of a sewage treatment plant as a big one, tens of thousands of customers. This is really for the area right nearby. It's for the homeowners and the properties in this small area of Walton County.
Okay.
So what happens, does this one reach capacity before the build out in that area?
Yes, it's predicted that the build out in that area would be more than 150,000 gallons per day. So at some point in the future, if this plant is built, it would have to be expanded to accommodate that.
Well, can it be expanded in that, on the property there, or would you have to find additional property?
No, the treatment plant itself will have plenty of room for expansion. We really don't know about the rapid infiltration basin because no geotech work has been done at this point. It's been held up because of the litigation. So the geotech work would answer that question. So it might be possible they might have to have more property later for the additional ribs.
Okay, anybody have any questions for applicant? All right. We'll open up the public comments, and we do have several people who have signed up to speak. I will ask that you try to honor the 3-minute.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to rebut a bit of what the attorney spoke about.
Okay.
He went through a rather large list of policies in our comprehensive plan that absolutely support elimination of septic tanks and going on to public sewer in and around coastal dune lakes, and specifically the outstanding Florida water of Lake Powell. Nowhere in any of those policies does it support putting a wastewater treatment plant that's close to one of those outstanding Florida waters or coastal dune lakes. Nothing that he just quoted supports that. It does support getting folks off septic tanks, and we're absolutely committed to do that. The commission has directed us, and we've accomplished expanding the coastal dune lake protection zone language. We went through litigation on that, but it was very clear that the county commission was interested in protecting these water bodies. But I just wanted to make sure that you did understand that nothing in what he pointed out supports putting a wastewater treatment plant in this location.
Correct. Thank you. Go back. I mean, we're going to go to public comments. Like I said, I would ask that you try to honor the 3 minutes. There's a lot of people who'd like to speak. I also ask that, I understand, more than likely, many of you will have the same things to say. Try not to be quite so repetitive, because once we've heard it, we've heard it. You can let us know that you support it and understand that. But again, we want to give everybody the opportunity. Just ask that you try to work with us a little bit where we can move on down the road. Hedman? Joseph? Yes, sir. Okay.
And,
Mr. Hammond, would you please state your name for the record?
yes, I'm Joseph Hanman,
Okay.
and I'm an uneducated in regard to the technical pieces of these issues, but I live there, and I love living there, and it's been my understanding, and again, I'm not sure that, but it has been my understanding that that body of water at Lake Powell is the highest, receives the highest rating of bodies of water for Florida. Somebody had indicated it was a number 5, which I understand is the highest. I also understand it's one of our largest natural dune lakes in North America. And these natural dune lakes, as we all know, are disappearing. And to do this and to put a wastewater treatment plant there just seems so counterintuitive. The gentleman who spoke in support of this, again, he talked about it not being likely. And he talked about this water running out, you know, after the final filtration, that it would run out over land, it was my understanding, and that it would seep into groundwater. But if we have a hurricane or bad storms and that ground is wet, I don't understand how that could work unaffected. And that was really all I had. I'd sure like to keep it the way it is. Thank you.
Sir. Reynolds Henderson?
I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Carpenter said about the recommendation for the denial, but I'll just say I have 2 properties that are very close. One is adjacent to the upper parcel there, and I have one on Lake Powell. And I also live in Watersound Origins, and bottom line, this is just a horrible location for this. I mean, I feel for them. I wish they could get their sewer plant somewhere else that made more sense, but I think that regional utilities would be open for discussions. I don't know, from what I hear in the community, is that door is not closed, it's just there's some bad blood. So that's all I'm going to say, but I hope you will deny.
Thank you. Emily Ellis?
Yes, Emily Ellis, 58 Rattlesnake Trail. So I live adjacent to the waterfront piece that they are talking about, which is in the 300-foot buffer zone. And they keep talking about nothing being in that buffer zone, but the pipe itself will go under that buffer zone, from what I understand. That's the only way they can get to the other side of the lake. But I am chair of the Lake Powell Community Alliance, and in that big binder right there is one of our letters to you. I think it was over 670 letters that were received, so obviously it is not a popular thing. And the obvious thing is it's not a location for it. So on a good note, this coming Saturday, we will be holding our 6th annual Lake Powell cleanup. We typically have 100 volunteers, and to date, we have picked up over 20,000 pounds of trash. So we're doing our part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gloria Turner.
My name is Gloria Turner. I live over on the, just on the east side of Lake Powell. I am a board member of the Friends of Camp Helen State Park, which is the citizen support organization for Camp Helen State Park. We're of around 181 acres. 2/3 of the state park borders Lake Powell. So you can see that our concern is keeping Lake Powell as pristine as it is. And yes, it is one of the largest, I think it is the largest coastal dune lake in North America. And we talk about the people that live around Lake Powell, but how many people come to Camp Helen and enjoy our trails and our paths and our kayaking and things that buffer up or right against Lake Powell? Camp Helen, every year that I've been on the board, has increased the number of visitors that we have come into Camp Helen. This past year, the last statistics that I saw We have approximately 43,000 visitors a year. So it's not just the people that are around Lake Powell, it's the people that come to Camp Helen State Park to also enjoy the amenities of our environment and our lake. I too have a letter, a personal letter in your folder over here, but I'm really concerned, as others are, about the quality of water that will be potentially damaged. And it'll be a bad thing to do and a loss of a great resource. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Debbie Hurd?
Debbie Hurd. I'm chairman of the Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board in Walton County. I'm also a realtor. I own a real estate firm and appraisal firm here in Walton County. There is a letter in there that is a letter of recommendation from the Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read that. Can I read it? Would you mind?
Sure.
Okay. Dear Board of County Commissioners, Planning Commissioners, and Walton County Planning Department staff, and it addresses the file. The Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board respectfully requests that the Inlet Beach Water Incorporated application with the number for the land use changed by ordinance, parcel numbers, and it lists the numbers. It be denied according to Walton County's Comprehensive Plan Policy C-1.47, which prohibits new point or non-point resources of pollution to be discharged into the lakes, including but not limited to water effluent and untreated stormwater runoff within the Coastal Dune Lake Protection Zone. Please see attached supplement letter previously submitted to Walton County Planning Department for consideration and review. We didn't have a meeting in time, so I drafted a letter previous to this, and then our board adopted it. So I'm going to read that to you if you don't mind. The coastal dune lakes in Walton County are, as many know, are only located in a few places in the world. South Walton is the only place in the world that they outfall into another body of water, the Gulf of Mexico. The opening and closing of the outfalls is an unexpected phenomenon that amazes each and every time, as if it was the first. The tea-colored water spreads into the emerald green waters, making their own work of art. The proposed wastewater treatment plant, future land use change, and please remember, this is a land use change. And he said, if this plant is never built, we still have the land use change. Remember that. Is of great concern to me, not only as chairman of the Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board, but also as a private citizen and local business owner. Please know that I cannot speak on behalf of the CD Lab, but then they address that later, without this being placed on our agenda for discussion and recommendation. However, I've been an appointed member of the CD Lab for several years, and this is my third year as chairman. These are my opinions and have not been discussed with any board, but then that changes. These three parcels lie within the Coastal Dune Lake Protection Zone and border the Osprey Creek section of Lake Powell. The combined almost 20 acres have a diverse ecosystem that cannot be fully understood from the 20% environmental study provided in this application. A 90% study would need to be presented to obtain the FWC permit needed for this project. From the current study, we can see there are three types of wetland communities located on the property. The possibility of threatened or endangered species are also noted. Historical research collected by volunteers of the CD Lab have indicated that eastern indigo snake on large tracts north of Osprey Creek and bald eagle nests have been observed in the Lake Powell area for many years. The gopher tortoise has also been known to be in this area and is mentioned constantly in comment regarding these large tracts. This project would have a huge impact on these wetlands and these noted in many other species documented in the site area. The indigo snake and the gopher tortoise both burrow. So you would have to do a much more comprehensive study to find those than a 20% study. In this step in the process of land use change, we have no plans for a wastewater treatment plant that is intended for this site. We have no indication where the NPDES outfall will be located. Of course, now they have said that. This is a major concern. This NPDES outfall during heavy rain events will be allowed to do emergency discharges into a body of water that outfall discharges into. The process of flocking, adding chemicals to remove suspended solid, produces water discharge with chemically induced pH level and different temperature is released into the outfall. At times of catastrophic events such as equipment failure and or weather event, emergency discharge permits could be allowed under DEP emergency discharge regulations. Under normal conditions, this wastewater treatment plant could change the ecosystem of the lake to an extent we cannot predict due to the rare natural nature of a coastal dune lake and watershed ecosystems, and most likely, in a catastrophic event, have adverse effects on the lake and surrounding watershed that would be irreversible. If there were to be such an event, this natural and mechanical opening of the Dune Lake outfall would pour any pollutants into the Gulf as well. There's another section that addresses, and I'll just quickly, when we have a trigger point on some of our lakes, and when we get to that trigger point, we have a DEP permit that allows us to open that outfall. So in any kind of weather event where we reach a certain level, Bay County also has that for the outfall at Lake Powell. So in an event where that water rose, and if there was a dump, it would go out into the Gulf. Of course, the permit's not needed as the lake opens naturally at many times, so we couldn't even predict that. And then basically, we don't allow septic plants within the Coastal Dune Lakes Protection Zone. Why would we even entertain the idea of a wastewater treatment plant within the zone or anywhere near any of our dune lakes, their tributaries, or watershed? There are no variances allowed except for hardship. This project would need variances to meet the code to the Coastal Dune Lake Protection Zone, and this project would not meet the hardship requirements of the code. What were to happen if this application moves on and passes and the flue change is granted? Would the adjacent parcels follow suit? They would be forced to follow suit because there's no way they could ever sell those properties as residential with this plant there. What if the intended project falls through? The horse is out of the barn. Anyone can move on and a new project that meets requirements of this land use. This is a terrible precedent to set and a risk to take with no plans to review, no assurances in place regarding development, operation, intended facility, and lack of required studies for permit of the facility needed from multiple state and federal regulatory agencies. Our area has unique weather systems with Gulf breezes as well as seasonal bay effect weather patterns and southerly winds. Any change in conditions could carry odors from this wastewater treatment plant long distances. Surrounding businesses, outdoor recreation, entertainment, resort, and tourist attractions such as South Walton beaches could be greatly affected long-term were this facility to be completed. Its proximity is 0.7 miles to the Gulf at Rosemary Beach, if you look straight, as the crow flies. Our local economy relies on tourism and exclusive real estate market of homes ranging from $400,000 to $15 million, and it's well over that now, in value, with the market increasing steadily. Many business owners and homeowners have made large-term investments and commitments to this community. As a local business owner and licensed realtor, it is my opinion that this project would be detrimental to the market and could have a negative effect on value and marketability of the surrounding neighborhood. Approval of this flue chain would be a disservice to this community and citizens of Walton County. The coastal dune lakes are a rare and precious natural resource that we have a responsibility to protect and preserve for future generations. We as a community should make every effort to be good stewards of these resources. Walton County has a responsibility to the citizens and taxpayers who have vested interest, whether it be business, home, or investment property. Walton County also has a responsibility to the millions of tourists who flock to our area for these natural resources, coastal dune lakes, sugar sand beaches, along with emerald waters, among a few that are heavily advertised by our TDC. We as a community must maintain standard we will all have to set for Walton County. So there's a couple of things here that has been said about the property values. If you'll see, that's Watersound Origins right there. That's Medley Street. In front of that are these ponds. The people who bought along Medley Street actually paid a premium for those lots because they bordered that pond. On the other side of that pond is a tree line that is just some native oaks that have been planted there, and they're approximately 15 to 20 feet apart. That's all that's there. The dirt road you see at one point is Jeep Road, and there's a power line easement. If you look from Medley Street, you can see straight across the pond over to this top red parcel where when they did the presentation to the Dune Lake board, there will be ponds eventually in that top parcel. So Origins would be looking directly over into those ponds. Now, if I was to do an appraisal on any parcel surrounding this that could see that or is within a relative distance to it, I would have to do a negative adjustment on that property for being adjacent to this or in the view of it One thing is location and one thing is view. You would have to adjust for one or the other. So that, to answer your question about property values, it would be detrimental. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned is that where they're building this, they do not service. This is not in their service area. So the persons that do have improved properties around this that are currently on well, their wells could eventually be contaminated, but they would have no service to hook up to a sewer system in that area. So that addresses some of the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Foreman? You don't have two letters you're gonna read too, do you?
No, just notes.
Okay.
Chris Foreman, 58 East Rattlesnake Trail. My wife and I moved out to our property in 1993, long before Origins was there. We actually used Side Camp Road to get to our property. Matter of fact, Gulf Power had instructions on how to get to us. As you got down to the power lines, you turn left at the brown couch. So, I was on the volunteer board to go to Mossy Head plant. There is a smell. It's not as bad as I assumed it would be, but that plant is nowhere near capacity. I understand that plant was built to service a neighborhood that went defunct. We have issues with our water wells. We're on wells out there, myself and my neighbors, and they will be rendered useless. And like Ms. Hamby said, Ms. Hurd said, that we're not in their franchise, so where are we gonna get water? Other things that come to mind when they are discharging into the soil, they're on the highlands part of the property, and Lake Powell sits 15 feet below that. Well, we have seepage slopes along our shoreline. So that water is gonna perk right down into the lake. If it doesn't come up from the bottom, it's gonna perk in right from the side. The pipeline, like she said, was also in the zone. We're gonna have lights, we're gonna have noise from pumps. I have to drive by this every day. I've been driving by this thing for the last 4 months since this all started. Every day I drive by and it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a sewage treatment plant right here. Now that will affect my property value. And my wife and I have 650 feet of waterfront on this lake. And it's gonna be in my backyard. So you can only imagine what that's gonna cost us. That is our nest egg for retirement. I don't have stocks and bonds. That is my stock and bond. Drinking wells, I covered that. I've also been told that there is land available, and I know this is for a fact, there's plenty of land available inside their franchise, but that is not a very popular option to put a sewage treatment plant inside your own neighborhood. So they've chosen my neighborhood. Now, luck of the draw is that St. Joe owns all the land between Inlet Beach and Peach Creek, and if they decide not to sell, that's their prerogative. I don't believe anybody realized they would find land back there behind me. Septic tanks, I also understand, that are on the lake are not going to be required to hook up to this new sewage treatment plant. And the majority of the houses on the waterfront in Walton County on that lake are on the septic tanks. Only the newer houses are being hooked up. So, you know, what good is that going to do to let a few more septic tanks come in if they're denied to not be able to build their own treatment plant? If anything, maybe the density should be decreased in that neighborhood so that we have fewer houses and let them put septic tanks back in. That's probably not a popular option for most people, I would think, especially developers, especially if you have 5 acres. But if you have an individual lot and it's a lot on record that's buildable, you know, I would prefer you put a septic tank in rather than put a sewage treatment plant in proximity to the lake. I am also here representing the one neighbor that nobody seems to talk about. So you have a U-shaped piece of property, okay? And this is my neighbor for the last 20 years. He's in the middle of the toilet bowl, and he calls himself a turd. So that's pretty much what I got to say about this. I'm not happy about it, but I've been dealing with this for several months now in good faith. I know they're doing their due diligence, and I hope the courts work it out. But I would like to see Walton County Commissioners get involved in this and straighten this out between regional and Inlet Beach water system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bill Schoaf?
It's hard to follow that guy.
You gotta
My
follow
name
that
is
far.
Bill Schoaf. I'm here, I'm a gentleman, I've been involved in development for over 40 years, and I've had 3 different projects, all that have had sewer treatment plants as part of the development. I can tell you a couple of things. They're very expensive. They're very complicated, and the problems start after they open, not before. So I am completely bewildered as to how an HOA and its associated water district can run this facility with security, with complete, absolute security that nothing will go wrong. And I would remind this body that they said the Titanic would never sink. I would remind this body that they said BP oil spill would never happen. And I know people that'll tell you that a pig will fly. This is the wrong thing in the wrong place for the wrong reason. This is a business issue. These people have a fight with regional utilities. They need to sit down like grown-up business people and come to a business solution. This should not become a problem for everybody else in the neighborhood and Lake Powell because they have a business problem. And it should be solved by business people and, if necessary, taken to court, and a judge will rule, and it will be over. But to jeopardize the lake over a business issue is absolutely ludicrous. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. David Kramer. Sure.
I'm here for myself and for one of my neighbors. I'll first read the letter from my neighbor, who is Mr. Stiles. He owns the 10 acres immediately north of the proposed site. Members of the Walton County Planning and Development Commission, I request and authorize David Kramer to read the following information and to represent its intent at the Walton County Planning and Development Public Commission hearing, September 13, 2018. Stiles Investment LLC owns the parcel directly north of it, 2 parcels identified on the IBWS-WBBTP parcel map and notification letter. We are pleased to see the discussion on development of property that's adjacent to ours. However, we do not support the change from conservation residential 2-to-1 and neighborhood infill to institutional zoning that would allow for the development of a waste water management institution. The presence of this type of institution will impact the surrounding residential environment in a negative manner. It will not be pleasingly aesthetic and complementary for the residential neighborhood. It will suppress the market value of properties in the immediate area, and it will risk and degrade the air and soil quality contamination incidents. Please oppose the request for this institutional zoning and encourage development of a residential area as it is currently zoned and planned. Respectfully yours, Andrew Stiles. Now, regarding myself, I own the piece adjacent to Mr. Stiles to the east, which is highlighted on the northeast end of this. I was at one time under contract with these developers for the property with these, this entity. Unknown to me at the time how they would do it and what they were doing. At the time, it came up for a 6-month extension. Blood was in the water, writing was on the wall, and it was obvious to me what was going on, and I posed to them heavy increases if they wanted to extend the options on my property because I was trying to back out. And they got on the cheap and they said we didn't want to deal with it. And I said, that's great. I don't want to deal with it either because it's what you're doing is not supposed to be. Regarding the comp plan, this is, and I'll give you a couple of things. You guys know that, I've been up here, know the book pretty good. It's a spot zoning, should be thrown out for just that reason alone. Secondly, and this place just, the puns are just racing through my mind. So I'm going to use an old one from the military, and I'll bring it a little cleaner than what you would hear in the military, is that turds roll downhill. And what's downhill from this project is an outstanding Florida water. Subsurface water, regardless of what these guys are going to say, is going to get into the wells, going to get into the lake. At that proximity, it's just science. I mean, it can make all kinds of claims, and it's just not going to happen. The third thing is, having the experience with these particular developers is they were trying to get out on the cheap from the very beginning, and the proximity of this project should have been moved farther away, but the expense of running the lines and pumping the effluent sewage to wherever it needed to be for spray fields was cost prohibitive on their budget. Another pun that came to mind between Regional and these guys is, this is a pissing contest, and we're losing because of their problem. The county needs to step in and settle this. It's the franchises. Our county commissioners can dictate where these franchise areas. And lastly, to this, as several of the other speakers spoke eloquently about the franchise area, this plant in the comp plan, when you bring something to an area and you're asking for a land use change, you're supposed to bring positive things to the community. You're supposed to improve. They're degrading the property values, degrading the air quality because of, I'll use a 50-cent word here, the salubrious breezes in our area blow from the south and the southwest. So that means that myself and Mr. Stiles and everybody in the water sound community will have the joy of having their salubrious breezes scented, let's say. So, and the third thing, and lastly, is because of the franchise area, this developer does not bring us, and everybody north of the lake has no option to get water or sewer from this sewage treatment plant or their facility. They've alluded to it or stayed away from telling you that, but the truth of the matter is they're not bringing us anything. They're not even bringing paved roads into the community. They don't offer anything other than, well, I'll just say it stinks. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Peter Watkinson.
Good evening. My name is Peter Watkinson. My wife and I have a condominium at Pinnacle Port in Bay County. I agree with everything I've heard thus far, with the exception of the gentleman at the table closest to you. We've heard less potential impact. We've heard only option. We've heard we really don't want to do it. Well, the solution would be to get regional utilities and the people that live there to somehow work out their problems. A consideration that hasn't been mentioned. I stated that we've got a condominium at Pinnacle Port, my wife and I. There are 408 units at Pinnacle Port. Carillon Beach has approximately 250 homes there. Nobody's said a word about Bay County. Bay County sits on Lake Powell, just as Walton County sits on Lake Powell. Has anybody asked Bay County what would happen if there were some deleterious impact by this treatment plant? I'll say, like the Titanic analogy, yeah, we had the Challenger, we had lots of other things, the Tacoma Narrows bridges. Well, I'm sure that they're professional engineers, but mistakes happen, things break. In drilling operations, if anybody's familiar with well drilling operations, they have problems with those as well. So the bottom line, sorry to be repetitive, regional utilities really needs to work together with these folks in their residences. They need to get that resolved by whatever manner they can. And perhaps Bay County would be interested in this as well if it's not been brought to their attention. I went to their offices this morning. They didn't seem to be aware that there was even a meeting here tonight, let alone much about the project going on. We're neighbor counties. We really perhaps should ask, since we all share Lake Powell. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rich Jaffe.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rich Jaffe. I'm the president of the Historic Inlet Beach Neighborhood Association, and we have been intimately involved in this process since word got out about the intention. You've heard a lot of really great points. You heard them from Mac, You heard them from the engineers, you heard them from the attorneys, you heard them from Rod Anderson, who happens to be one of my neighbors just a few doors down. I also live on Lake Powell. What you haven't heard is the fact, and somebody alluded to it, and I will borrow his phrase, that this is a pissing contest between regional utilities and the Inlet Beach water system. It goes back decades when regional utilities wanted to take over the Inlet Beach water system because we have very good wells. It has continued, and it has brought us here. Quite frankly, it's inane for this issue to be in front of you because there never should have been an issue. As Rod Anderson mentioned, they don't want to build this. They don't have a choice at this point because regional utilities arbitrarily chose to attempt to blow up the contract with Inlet Beach. At this point, nothing's happened with that. There are still developers building in Inlet Beach. There are still people having their sewage serviced. And I don't think that if you went right now and attempted to get a bunch of permits to build in Inlet Beach that regional utilities would say no. However, what is happening is that there is a dance going on, and we and yourselves have been put in the middle of it because nobody is holding regional utilities' feet to the fire. It's being litigated, but quite frankly, it shouldn't even be litigated because the people who sit in those seats at an alternate time, the county commissioners, need to tell regional utilities, which is for all intents and purposes owned by Walton County, and answers to the commissioners, that they need to honor the contract that is in place right now. The problem with all of that is, quite frankly, in the longer picture, that contract is up in 2023, 24. So something is going to happen or have to happen in the long term beyond that point, or else we'll all end up right back here in the first place. It's a shame. But the simple answer to this is that plant is in the wrong place. Our board, our residents for the most part, will tell you that. We don't even have an objection to Inlet Beach Water System building a treatment plant, but everybody knows, including, I think, the guys on the board there, that this is the wrong place. But it is the only place that they have been able to find to build this plant. It doesn't make any sense at all. But what makes sense is for this county to lay down the law to regional utilities, tell them to honor that contract, and to come up with a longer-term solution to this problem because it's going to come back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have nobody else who's signed up to speak. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? I see none. We'll close public comments. Would you all like to answer any of that real quick? You don't have to. Okay. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Motion to deny.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to take about a 10-minute break and then come. They don't nobody pay attention, man. No respect.
No respect, I did.
No respect.
No respect.
He didn't want to do that all night. We can go ahead and call the meeting back to order. I believe we're on item number 5.
Yes, sir. This is the Emerald Transformer Warehouse Edition. This is a request to approve by final order. It's been reviewed by Renee Bradley. It's an application submitted by Baker Engineering on behalf of Florida Acquisition, Inc., requesting approval to demolish an existing 8,799 square foot warehouse to be replaced with a 16,093 square foot warehouse on plus or minus 24.05 acres with the future land use of industrial. You may be familiar with the existing location of Emerald Transformer. It's in the southwest corner of the intersection of Sunrise Road and State Highway 83, just north of Defuniak Springs. This site is served by water and sewer. The county was successful in getting a community development block grant a number of years ago to provide wastewater service to this facility. We'd like to enter the staff report into the record if we could, Mr. Chairman.
Accepted.
We find this project meets the requirements of the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan.
Commissioners have any questions of staff?
Is that right there above Fannon's Restaurant?
Yes, sir, on the same side of the road.
Do you know where Fannon's is?
Yeah, I very impressed.
I'm impressed. Is anybody here from the applicant?
Good evening. Nolan Baker, Baker Engineers. As Max stated, we're basically taking one of the existing facilities, tearing it down, and building back over some concrete area that they've been utilizing throughout the years. So, if you got any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions, commissioners? Don't see any. Thank you very much.
No, thank y'all.
We have nobody who signed up to speak. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Move to accept.
Second.
And I need to point out to our attorney that we forgot to swear everybody in.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry we did. Yeah, so I guess just to cover that, Mr.
Yeah,
Baker.
don't leave yet.
Just if you come forward, Mr. Baker. So Mr. Baker and Matthew, two were the only one that spoke on that item. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you provided to this board was the truth? Okay, and then anybody else who plans on testifying on any of the remaining items, if you would stand to be sworn in. Okay, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide to this board is the truth? I do. Thank you. Whenever you come forward, just state your name and state that you've been sworn in. Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Move to accept.
Did we vote? Okay, we have a motion on the floor
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This brings us to item number 6, the Capelong on 30A project. I hope I pronounced that right. It's a request to approve by final order. It's a major development that's been reviewed by Bob Barati of our staff. It's submitted by Emerald Coast Associates on behalf of Ken Minshew, requesting approval of 6 multifamily units and 6 single-family lots on approximately 3.42 acres with the future land use of neighborhood infill. Project's located on the south side of 30A and is identified by the parcel numbers in your packet. This is in the Blue Mountain Beach neighborhood. We'd like to request a staff report be entered into evidence.
It's accepted.
The applicant's here to present his case.
Mr. Chairman, fellow commissioners, my name is Ken Minshew. I've been a resident in Walton County since 2005, and myself and my company are the applicant for this proposal. I'll be real quick, a lot quicker than that sewer deal was. When we purchased this piece of property, our first idea was, okay, what is the existing zoning? Well, the existing zoning is neighborhood infill, which would allow you up to 8 dwelling units an acre. So we looked at that, and we did an analysis on it, and found out in order to even come to this body and ask for 8 dwelling units an acre, I would have to destroy the entire piece of property, level it, take every tree out in order to meet the regulations to be able to do something as that dense. So my dad was an old developer, and he always taught me, if you listen to the marketplace, what they really want, and then you look at the piece of property and you try to put the two together, you're going to bake a good cake. So we looked at it from a different viewpoint. How do we get low density, and will the market accept low density? So our design, our plan is to put 6 large single-family lots facing Big Redfish Lake. Then transitioning from Sanctuary Redfish here, we transitioned with a lower density townhome. So you transition from condos to townhomes down to makes common sense, and it works good. So that's kind of our plan, to go for a 12 dwelling unit to the maximum 12 dwelling unit to the acre piece of property. Build real high end, because that's what the marketplace is asking for. High end homes up on the ridge. It's a ridge that runs across over the lake. We're 26 feet, about the center of the property is 26 feet about the mean high water mark. So it really sets nicely. You look down across Big Redfish Lake, out into the open Gulf of Mexico. I love it because I want to build here, and I think I'll find 12 people very easily that'll love it. So I had our community meeting. Some of the gentlemen are here today. And then I started meeting with folks that called me. I put a sign up, so I wanted them to call me, not the county. I want to talk to you, find out what you have. And after meeting with all of my community neighbors, I have a packet of referral letters in support of this plan right here. So we would appreciate it.
I'm sorry, so you'd like those to be made?
Yes, can you, I have a packet for each of the commissioners. It's not in their packet right now, but there's one for each of them. And these are,
This applicant's exhibit 1.
Accepted.
and those are, if you looked up the addresses, it's people in Redfish Lane, which is like 2 blocks down the street, people in Bannerman Beach, which is like a half block down the street, and those next door in Sanctuary at Redfish have written positive letters in response because they've seen what we're requesting right now to do, and they're in support of that. So we appreciate a positive vote tonight and appreciate y'all listening. Thank you.
You're not building a sewage treatment facility?
No, we're gonna use the Walton County. We got it in the front yard.
Dean Burgess with Emerald Coast Associates. I have been sworn, and I'll be brief. I think Ken did a good job of introducing the project. A few highlights that I'd just like to touch on with regard to the code. Being an infill, of course, it carries a density of up to 8 units per acre. We're at 3.5, which a lot of folks would just say that's, you can do more. Why don't you?
How many could you do, max out?
Could do 28 units on this lot, on this property. Now, with all the Coast of Dune Lake restrictions, that would be very difficult. They'd be real postage stamp lots.
Or you could do a condo.
Or you could do a single building condominium, and that was one of the things that we discussed. I was somewhat surprised when Mr. Minshew came back with his market research and said, you know what, large lots are a premium here. And anybody who's done any recent work on 30A has realized that. People are looking for lots that are over 50 foot. You can find 35, 40-foot lots all day long. And these lots average about 60, I think we're right at 67 feet per lot on average, almost 70 feet per lot. They're plus or minus 0.4 acres. Again, something that's a rarity on 30A, especially in this setting with the relief on the property and the views across the lake. But what that afforded us to do is also meet all the coastal dune lake setback requirements, the development percentages within the coastal dune lakes with ease, and still have room for a 4,000 square foot footprint on the lots. So I think this development fits in nicely with the theme of 30A. It's actually incompatible with what's around it because it's not dense enough. But I think that's a good thing in a lot of people's eyes. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
We don't hear that very often, you know that? Stormwater, what are you doing with it?
Stormwater will be held in an exfiltration system in the roadway that's far up from the coastal dune lake. Essentially every house will have, much like a sanitary sewer tap, you'll have a stormwater tap that goes into that. So collect it in your roof drains, and it's real simple. Connect to your stormwater piping.
Working.
And we did meet the 1.5 inch requirement because we are in a coastal dune lake watershed, so we meet the improved stormwater criteria.
Parking, where are you parking the cars?
The townhome units have garages, so parking will be, out of view, out of sight from 38 inside garages. Of course, on the lots, you got half-acre lot. The idea is not to have the cars visible from 38 or from within the development.
That's good. Be under.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, Dean.
Thank you.
Again, we had nobody sign up to speak on this. Is there anybody who would like to? Yes, sir.
Apparently I didn't fill the form out correctly because I did sign up.
Well, it probably got put in the wrong folder by
Okay.
mistake.
My name's Gary Brandt. I am the president of the Sanctuary Redfish Board,
Were you
which
sworn
would
in?
be,
Were you sworn in?
no.
Would you just raise your hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide to this board will be the truth?
Yes. Thank you. Again, I say my name's Gary Brandt. I am the president of the board of directors of Sanctuary Redfish, which is the property that adjoins the west side of this development. Initially, of course, when Mr. Minshew's sign went up, you can imagine all the phone calls I got from residents. What's going on? What's it going to be? How are we going to stop this? It was a little bit, not quite like the sewer project, but just a little bit like that. So I contacted Mr. Minshew, and he was very gracious. He and I met. Actually, we've met several times. He went through all the detail with me. He took me, showed me projects that he's done. I was fortunate enough to see the finish work and some of the quality of the buildings that he's done. The fact that it is low density just thrills us to death. I do have a personal letter in that packet as the president of the board of directors and representing our board, urging your approval. But one thing, and since you swore me in and we have an attorney here, one thing I want to know for sure is I never asked Mr. Minshew if he's going to build a sewer plant, but I'm glad you did, and I know that's on the record, right? Okay, so we don't have to concern ourselves with that. And with that, I would urge you, please approve the project. We'd be thrilled with them as a neighbor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Debbie Hurd, once again, Chairman of the Coastal
Were you
Dunes.
sworn in?
Yeah, earlier when you.
No, you didn't swear in earlier.
Oh, I raised my hand when you said, is anybody going to
Oh,
speak?
okay.
I did. Okay, I have a couple of questions. One is the 100-foot buffers are going to be in place, and they're not going to be destroyed by accident, correct? We have a ongoing thing happening in the county where someone will totally clear cut their lot and then say, oops, I didn't know. And basically, they already have a landscaping plan, so they get into a restoration plan, which they have to do if they take out the buffer, and then they plant the vegetation in, but they've taken away the natural vegetation that's been there for many, many years. So that's something that concerns the Coastal Dune Lake Board a great deal. And so changing hats now, I'm on the TDC Beach Management Committee. So let me ask, where are these people going to use the beach?
If you would address your questions here.
Okay, where are these people going to,
And if you would, just go ahead and state all your questions, he can answer them when you get done.
Where are they going to access the beach?
Okay, we'll get, is that the last question?
I don't have any other questions now. He answered the stormwater, so that's it.
Okay, thank you. We'll let him come up and answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate the time. We have 3 ways to access the Gulf of Mexico. You can go down Blue Mountain Beach Road, which there's Walton County access points on Blue Mountain Beach Road. We can go down on the west side of Sanctuary by the Sea, where we have a recorded pedestrian easement that the preserve uses, and we also have the rights to it because the land seller sold me the piece of property, sold all that property around it. And then the third way, we can go over the, by personal watercraft, we could go over Big Redfish Lake and end up on Walton County property right directly on the Gulf.
Okay.
Those 3 ways.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to talk on this item? Yes, ma'am. Would you please come up to the microphone?
I'd like Mr. Minshew to.
Ma'am, would you please state your name?
Ambler Slade?
Were you sworn in?
No.
Do you swear swear or affirm that the testimony you provide to this board will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
And again, if you would address your questions up here, and he'll be
I'd
able
like
to answer.
Mr. Minshew to clarify the second access he mentioned. He said the Blue Mountain Beach Road and the personal watercraft. And please clarify the other one.
Okay,
Thank you.
is that, okay. Mr. Minshew?
On the west side of Sanctuary by the Sea, east side, excuse me, you're right, thank you, Gary. On the east side of Sanctuary by the Sea, there's a 5-foot pedestrian easement that came deeded with my piece of property. That's already used by the preserve across the street north of 30A. They're using it, and we have access to it also.
Okay, thank you.
And so everybody does, and the two condominiums, one on each side of me, has access through that pedestrian easement. I have access through the pedestrian easement, and the preserve across the street, the single-family homes have access through that pedestrian.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. You get it out?
Yeah.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners. That brings us to item number 7 on our agenda, the Executive Business Complex. This is a request to approve by final order. It's been reviewed by Tim Brown of our staff. It's a major development order submitted by Emerald Coast Associates on behalf of L&V Investments, requesting approval to improve an existing developed site that includes a car wash to add additional 9 vacuum spaces with an overhead canopy, 200 square foot equipment building, and to rearrange the traffic circulation around the car wash on approximately 2.32 acres with future land use of coastal center mixed use. Project's located at the southeast corner of US Highway 98 West and South Geronimo Street intersection. It's identified by the parcel numbers in your package. We'd like to request that the staff report be entered into evidence.
Accepted.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. Dean Burgess with Emerald Coast Associates, and I have been sworn. We're the agents of the developers on this project. The reason that we're before you is because this project is in the scenic corridor. Our building is actually 200 square feet. It's a little equipment building that will house the vacuum equipment. Other than that, it's just a bunch of vacuum stalls that will be utilized for the existing car wash. Not really a whole lot to talk about here tonight. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to respond.
Commissioners?
What kind of vacuums are you using?
I designed the stormwater and utilities and parking. They're good ones.
Okay.
They suck.
Excuse me.
They suck.
Kristen, is this something that'll be rectified with the new changes we're making to the code? These kind of projects, will they have a 200 square foot? Really? In the scenic quarter?
The scenic quarter requires all those projects to be major developments. We are addressing the neighborhood infill, and we did on Monday night. Those projects are no longer automatically major developments.
Okay. Thank you. Then I ain't got no more questions.
I'm good.
Again, we had nobody sign up. Is there anybody who would like to address this item? Okay, we'll close public comments. Commissioners?
Motion approved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners. That brings us to item number 8 on our agenda, the Louie Louie expansion. This is a request to approve by final order. It's been reviewed by Tim Brown. This is a major development order application that is also in the US 98 Scenic Corridor. It's submitted by O'Connell and Associates Consulting Engineers on behalf of POL LLC, requesting approval for a 1,247 square foot expansion of the existing restaurant, a 4,365 square foot office building, and a 6-unit apartment building on plus or minus 2.078 acres with the future land use of village mixed use. Project's located on the northwest corner of the intersection of Musset Bayou Road and US Highway 98 West. It's identified by the parcel numbers in your package, and we'd like to request that staff report be entered into evidence.
It's accepted.
Evening, Commissioners. John Nash with O'Connell and Associates. We're the agent for this project. There's not a lot to say except for it's a small expansion to the restaurant. And behind the restaurant are two vacant parcels that are being developed. Immediately behind the restaurant will be an office building with parking, and there's a residential building behind that. Part of the reason this was put together was for parking. They realize they have sometimes have some parking issues over there, and the idea here is to share the parking with the office building. And the office building is intended to operate at different times in the restaurant, which is open only for dinner. Y'all usually ask about stormwater, so I'll go ahead and tell you about it. This discharges to an old mosquito control ditch that's no longer maintained, but because it discharges to a mosquito control ditch, we've designed it in accordance with the Land Development Code for a 100-year storm event for attenuation, and we're meeting the treatment requirements. If you got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So the ditch is no longer maintained, the drainage ditch?
The ditch is there and it's operating. The mosquito control district has some mosquito control ditches that were constructed that they no longer have access to. And this one, my understanding is the property to the west of it, they no longer have access to, so they don't go out there and clear cut it and maintain it and mow it, but it's still there and operating. As part of our project, there's in this area here, there's a big pipe here that actually does some conveyance from the roadside ditch to this mosquito control ditch that's back here, in order to maintain that flow. There's some overflow pipes that come across Musset Bayou Road that are connected to that, and we went to great pains in order to make sure that that access and the conveyance was still there and useful.
It just sounds strange. You're gonna use something that's no longer maintained.
Well, we're not.
You understand? It's just.
We're not using it. The natural discharge point to this site happens to be an old mosquito control ditch. Because it's an old mosquito control ditch, the Land Development Code requires that we attenuate a greater storm and provide more storm water, and we've done that.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay.
Thank you.
We'll open up public comments. Anybody wish to address this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comments, commissioners.
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners. This brings us to our final agenda item tonight, number 9 on our agenda. This is the Topsail West PUD Phase 2 and Phase 3 amendment. This is a request to approve by final order. It's been reviewed by Tim Brown of our staff. It's a major development submitted by McNeil Carroll Engineering on behalf of the St. Joe Company. They're requesting to change the Topsail West PUD Phase 2 from senior living to assisted living, and changing the corresponding parking standard for that phase. And changing Phase 3 of the PUD from convenience store gas station to restaurant and shopping center on approximately 7.74 acres with future land use of Town Center 2. You might recognize these two parcels. The assisted living parcel is the parcel immediately north of our Small Mart, and the parcel that's changing from convenience store, gas station to restaurant and shopping center is the parcel immediately to the east of Small Mart. The applicant's here to present their case.
Good evening, Robert Carroll, McNeil Carroll Engineering. I am the agent. I have not been sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you provide to this board will be the truth?
Yes, ma'am, I do. So Thompson West PUD was previously approved. They've done some land clearing out there to finalize their dredge and fill permits. But during that PUD process, they were very detailed in the site planning, and so therefore you have all this site plan in front of you. And what we're requesting to do is that northwestern parcel, we are requesting to go from that senior living to assisted, and we're actually proposing to reduce the amount of units from 190 to 130 units. There's just not a need for as many units, so we might as well go ahead and reduce that now. And then the two other map changes are the convenience store. There's already one across the street, so most likely there's not a need for another convenience store. Change that to a restaurant use, and the other building to the east of that from a restaurant to a retail/restaurant building. Each one of these projects, they'll all have to come in for their own individual development orders, but this is just the master plan itself on the PUD. As an overall, we're not asking for any increase in square footage. It's actually the same exact square footage on the commercial, just a reduction in the amount of units. And we just want to have the same parking ratio as the assisted living. So those are the changes we're here before you.
Commissioners?
What will be the net traffic, more or less, if these get changed? Will it be the same or?
It's actually a reduction, because when you go from an assisted living or the senior assisted to assisted, those people don't drive, so therefore we don't need as much parking. That when you have the kind of transition, you start at that senior to assisted to.
So there'll be less impact on that intersection?
Yes,
because
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. With that type of facility, because again, the residents there don't drive. So
Okay.
therefore we don't need as much parking. Convenience stores, those are high traffic drivers versus we would go to a restaurant use. And each individual project will turn in their own traffic study as well when they come in for approval.
Anything else? Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you.
Anybody wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I believe that was the last item on the agenda, so we'll stand adjourned.
All right, good deal.
What was that?
Good job. Remember that sewer thing?